John Anderson had always been the kind of guy who loved simple pleasures. A warm cup of coffee in the morning, a good book on a rainy day, and most importantly, time spent with family. For years he dreamed of owning a little cabin by the lake, a place where his daughter could escape the chaos of city life and create memories that would last a lifetime. When his daughter graduated college, John decided it was time to make that dream come true for her. He found the perfect spot, a cozy wooden cabin nestled right on the edge of Crystal Lake. It wasn't fancy or over the top, but it had charm. The view of the water shimmering under the sun was breathtaking, and the surrounding trees gave it a sense of privacy, like it belonged to another world entirely. The moment Emily saw the cabin, she fell in love with it. Her eyes lit up as she walked through the front door, imagining all the weekends they'd spend there together. John felt a surge of pride knowing he'd given her something so special. But before handing over the keys, he wanted to make sure everything was just right. So, for weeks, he worked tirelessly cleaning every nook and cranny, painting the walls a fresh coat of white, and even installing new furniture. He made sure the place felt welcoming, like a home away from home. Finally, the big day arrived. It was a crisp autumn morning, the kind where the air smells faintly of pine and fallen leaves crunch beneath your feet. John rented a small truck to move some boxes into the cabin. Inside those boxes were essentials: blankets, kitchenware, photo frames, and other little things that would turn the empty space into a cozy retreat. Nothing extravagant, just the basics. He pulled up to the cabin around 9 a.m., feeling excited about the day ahead. As he hopped out of the truck and started unloading the first box, he noticed a sleek silver car pulling up behind him. Out stepped a woman wearing oversized sunglasses and an expression that screamed authority. She strutted over with the confidence of someone who owned the place, though John knew better. This was Karen Whitmore, the president of the Homeowners Association, HOA, a title she wore like a crown. Karen wasted no time getting to the point. "What exactly are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. John paused mid-step, holding the box in his arms. He blinked at her, caught off guard by her tone. I'm moving some stuff into my daughter's cabin," he replied politely. "She owns this property." Karen crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed. "Do you have permission to do that?" "There are rules about deliveries during quiet hours. You're disturbing the peace." John frowned. Disturbing the peace? All he was doing was carrying a few boxes onto the porch. It wasn't like he was blaring music or throwing a party. Still, he tried to stay calm. "This is my daughter's house," he explained again. "We're not violating any rules, just setting things up." But Karen wasn't having it. She tapped her foot impatiently, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I don't care whose house it is. If you don't leave right now, I'll call the police." John stared at her, dumbfounded. Was she serious? Over a couple of boxes? He opened his mouth to argue, but Karen had already whipped out her phone and dialed 911. Within minutes, 2 police officers arrived, their lights flashing as they parked near the cabin. The sight of the patrol car made John's stomach sink. What should have been a peaceful morning was quickly spiraling out of control. The officers approached cautiously, asking what was going on. John showed them the deed to the property, proving it belonged to his daughter. They verified the information and told him he was free to continue, but not without a warning. If Karen filed a formal complaint, they might need to investigate further. Feeling defeated and embarrassed, John packed up the truck and left the boxes. Sitting on the porch, he couldn't believe how quickly things had gone south. Back at home, he called Emily to tell her what happened. She listened quietly at first, then burst out laughing. "Are you kidding me?" She called the cops because, "You moved boxes? That's insane." But as the laughter faded, Anger set in. "Dad, this isn't okay. We can't let her treat us or anyone else like this. Something needs to change," John agreed. Little did they know, this encounter was just the beginning of a much bigger battle, one that would test their patience, resilience, and determination to stand up against someone who thought she ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist. The next morning, John woke up with a mix of frustration and determination bubbling inside him. He couldn't let Karen's antics ruin what was supposed to be a fresh start for Emily. That cabin wasn't just 4 walls and a roof, it was a symbol of his love for his daughter, a gift meant to bring joy, not stress. So, after grabbing a quick cup of coffee, he loaded the truck again and headed back to Crystal Lake. This time, though, he came prepared. He brought along copies of the property deed, receipts for the cabin purchase, and even photos of Emily, smiling in front of the place during their earlier visit. If Karen tried to pull another stunt, he'd be ready. When he arrived, it didn't take long for trouble to find him. As he started unloading the second round of boxes, he heard the unmistakable sound of a car engine pulling up behind him. Sure enough, there she was, Karen, stepping out of her shiny silver Mercedes like she owned the entire lake. Her designer sunglasses were perched on her nose, and her lips curled into a smug smile that made John's blood boil. "You're back," she said flatly, as if she were stating the obvious. "I thought I made myself clear yesterday." John took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. "Karen, this is my daughter's property. We're not breaking any rules. You can't stop us from moving in our things." "Oh, but I can," she shot back, her voice dripping with superiority. She pulled out a clipboard and waved it dramatically in the air. "You see, Mr. She paused, pretending she didn't know his name. "Anyway, according to these documents, you violated several HOA guidelines already. Improper parking, noise complaints, unauthorized modifications to the property. You name it." John blinked at her, utterly baffled. "Unauthorized modifications? What modifications?" The only thing he'd done was carry some boxes onto the porch. Noise complaints? All he'd done was walk quietly between the truck and the cabin. And improper parking? His truck was parked neatly in the driveway, nowhere near blocking anyone else's space. "This is ridiculous," John muttered under his breath, but Karen wasn't done. She flipped through her clipboard like she was putting on a show, reading off each fabricated offense with theatrical flair. By the end of her spiel, she had somehow managed to accuse him of everything short of arson. "And unless you want more trouble," she added, pointing a manicured finger at him, "you'll leave now and come back when you've scheduled an appointment with the HOA board." John clenched his fists, trying desperately to keep his cool. He knew arguing with her wouldn't solve anything. Instead, he grabbed one of the folders he'd brought with him and handed it to her. "Here's proof that this is my daughter's property. Everything we're doing here is completely legitimate. If you have a problem, maybe you should focus on actually helping people instead of harassing them." Karen glanced at the folder briefly, then tossed it aside without even looking at its contents. "Don't try to intimidate me with paperwork," she snapped. "If you don't comply, I'll call the police again, and trust me, they won't be as lenient this time." For a moment, John considered standing his ground, but something told him that pushing back right then and there would only escalate things unnecessarily. Reluctantly, he finished loading the remaining boxes into the truck and drove away, leaving the cabin empty once again. On the drive home, he replayed the confrontation over and over in his mind. How could someone be so petty? Why did she care so much about a few harmless boxes? That evening, John sat down with Emily to discuss what had happened. At first, she laughed nervously, thinking maybe Karen was just having a bad day or trying to assert her authority. But the more John explained the fake violations, the threats, The sheer absurdity of it all, the angrier she became. "This isn't about the boxes," Emily said finally, shaking her head. "She's using this as an excuse to control people. Dad, we can't let her win. Not just for us, for everyone else who has to deal with her nonsense." John nodded slowly. He realized Emily was right. This wasn't just a personal vendetta. It was part of a larger pattern. Over dinner, they brainstormed ways to fight back. They agreed that the first step was understanding exactly how much power Karen really had. Was she truly enforcing legitimate rules, or was she making things up as she went along? To find out, John decided to attend the next HOA meeting. The meeting was held in the community center, a drab little building with fluorescent lights and uncomfortable folding chairs. When John walked in, he immediately felt out of place. Most of the attendees were older couples chatting casually while sipping coffee. Karen sat at the front of the room, presiding over the gathering like a queen surveying her kingdom. She barely acknowledged John when he entered, which suited him fine. He wanted to observe before speaking up. As the meeting began, Karen launched into a lengthy speech about maintaining the integrity of Crystal Lake. She talked about landscaping standards, paint color restrictions, and noise ordinances, all the usual HOA jargon. But then she moved on to something more troubling: fines. Apparently, several residents had been hit with hefty penalties for minor infractions. One man had been fined $300 because his mailbox leaned slightly to the left. Another woman received a citation for hanging curtains that didn't match the approved fabric samples. John listened intently, jotting down notes. It became clear that Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was weaponizing them. Every violation seemed arbitrary, designed to exert control rather than improve the neighborhood. Worse still, no one dared challenge her. When she opened this floor for questions, most people stayed silent, avoiding eye contact. Only a few brave souls raised concerns, and those were quickly dismissed by Karen with vague promises to look into it later. After the meeting ended, John lingered behind, hoping to talk to some of the other homeowners. He approached a friendly-looking older woman named Margaret, who was packing up her knitting supplies. "Hi," he said cautiously. "Mind if I ask you something?" Margaret looked up and smiled warmly. "Of course. What's on your mind?" "Well," John began, lowering his voice, "what's the deal with Karen? Everyone seems scared of her." Margaret sighed heavily, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Then she leaned in closer. "Let's just say Karen likes to keep everyone in line. Last summer, she fined me $500 because I planted pink petunias in my garden. Said they clashed with the HOA-approved palette. Can you believe that?" John shook his head, stunned. "Pink petunias? Really?" Margaret went on to share another story about a neighbor who got into trouble for hosting a birthday party that went past 10 p.m. According to Karen, the music, barely audible from outside, was a disturbance. The list of grievances went on. And by the time John left the community center, he was fuming. Karen wasn't just annoying. She was toxic. Her behavior wasn't just affecting his family. It was poisoning the entire neighborhood. Something had to change. But how could one person stand up to someone like Karen, who thrived on intimidation and manipulation? On the drive home, John made a decision. He wouldn't back down. He wouldn't let Karen bully him or anyone else anymore. With Emily's support, he vowed to fight back, not just for themselves, but for everyone living under Karen's reign of terror. Little did he know, this decision would set off a chain reaction that would transform Crystal Lake forever. The next few days were a whirlwind for John. He couldn't stop thinking about what Margaret had told him at the HOA meeting. The stories she shared about Karen's antics weren't isolated incidents, they were part of a pattern. It was clear Now that Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was using them as tools to control people, instill fear, and maintain her grip on the neighborhood. What started as frustration quickly turned into determination. John realized this wasn't just his fight anymore, it was everyone's fight. And if no one else was willing to stand up to Karen, then it was up to him. John began by digging deeper into the HOS operations. He requested copies of past meeting minutes, financial reports, and rulebooks documents that were technically public but rarely scrutinized by anyone outside the board. At first, Karen tried to block his requests, claiming they were privileged information. But John knew better. He reminded her and the rest of the HOA that homeowners had a right to access these records under state law. Reluctantly, she handed over the files, though not without a glare that could freeze water. What John found in those documents shocked him. For years, Karen had been funneling HOA funds into projects that benefited her own property while neglecting others. She'd spent thousands on landscaping for her lakeside mansion, charging it all to the association's budget. Meanwhile, other residents struggled to get basic repairs approved, like fixing potholes or replacing broken streetlights. Worse still, there were numerous complaints from homeowners who felt their voices were ignored or silenced during meetings. Some had even stopped attending altogether, too tired of fighting against Karen's ironclad control. Armed with this evidence, John decided it was time to rally the community. He started small, reaching out to neighbors he'd met at the last OO meeting. One by one, he shared what he'd uncovered, showing them receipts, emails, and photos that proved Karen's misuse of power. At first, many were hesitant. They'd seen what happened to people who crossed Karen: fines, threats, even lawsuits. But John reassured them that together they could make a difference. "If we stick together," he said, "she can't touch us." Word spread quickly. Soon, John wasn't alone in his mission. A group of concerned homeowners began meeting secretly, brainstorming ways to hold Karen accountable. They called themselves the Crystal Lake Coalition, a name that gave them a sense of unity and purpose. Each member brought something valuable to the table. Margaret offered insights into Karen's tactics, having dealt with her for years. Another neighbor, Tom, was good with numbers and helped analyze the HOA's finances. Even Emily pitched in, designing flyers and social media posts to raise awareness among younger residents. Their first big move came when election season rolled around. Every year, the HOA held elections to choose its board members, including the president. Traditionally, these elections were a formality. Karen ran unopposed, and most people didn't bother voting. But this year would be different. With the coalition's support, John announced his candidacy for HOA president. His platform was simple: transparency, fairness, and accountability. He promised to rewrite outdated rules, cap fines at reasonable levels, and ensure every homeowner had a voice in decision-making. Karen, of course, wasn't pleased. When she heard about John's campaign, she laughed it off as a joke. "He doesn't stand a chance," she told anyone who would listen. "No one's going to vote for him." To her credit, she wasn't entirely wrong, at least not at first. Many residents were scared to rock the boat, fearing retaliation if they supported John. Others simply didn't believe change was possible. After all, Karen had been in charge for so long that it seemed impossible to imagine life without her calling the shots. But John refused to give up. He knocked on doors, attended neighborhood events, and hosted informal meet and greets where he listened to people's concerns. He didn't sugarcoat things or make empty promises. Instead, he spoke honestly about the challenges facing Crystal Lake and how, together, they could overcome them. Slowly but surely, his message began to resonate. People started opening up about their frustrations. the endless fees, the arbitrary rules, the lack of communication. For the first time in years, they felt heard. As momentum grew, so did Karen's desperation. She launched a smear campaign against John, accusing him of being a troublemaker who wanted to disrupt the community. She sent out letters to every household, listing supposed reasons why he was unfit for leadership. According to her, John was reckless, irresponsible, and only interested in tearing down the HOA's hard work. But instead of intimidating voters, her attacks backfired. Residents saw through her lies and recognized them for what they were: fear tactics designed to keep them in line. The turning point came during a lively debate held at the community center. Both candidates were invited to present their platforms, and the room was packed. Karen arrived wearing a designer suit, flanked by her usual entourage of loyal supporters. She spoke first, delivering a polished speech about maintaining order and protecting property values. Her tone was confident, almost condescending, as if she already assumed victory. When it was John's turn, he took a different approach. Rather than focusing on himself, he highlighted the stories of real people in the audience. He talked about Margaret's pink petunias, Tom's crumbling driveway, and the young family down the street who'd been fined for letting their kids play outside after dark. He reminded everyone that the HOA existed to serve them, not the other way around. By the time he finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. For the first time, Karen looked rattled. Election day arrived, and turnout was higher than anyone expected. Lines stretched out the door of the community center as homeowners cast their votes. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful, like everyone sensed something big was about to happen. When the results were finally announced, the room fell silent. Then slowly cheers erupted. John had won by a landslide. Karen stormed out before the celebration could begin, muttering threats under her breath. But no one cared. For the first time in years, Crystal Lake felt alive with possibility. Residents hugged each other, congratulating John on his victory. Margaret wiped away tears of joy, saying, "We did it. We actually did it." In the weeks that followed, John got to work implementing the changes he'd promised. He organized town hall meetings where residents could voice their opinions without fear of judgment. He introduced caps on fines and streamlined the approval process for home improvements. Most importantly, he made sure everyone felt valued and respected. Under his leadership, the HOA became less of an authoritarian body and more of a collaborative effort, a true reflection of the community it served. Of course, Karen didn't disappear overnight. She filed grievances, lodged complaints, and even threatened legal action. But without her position of power, her attempts to stir up trouble fell flat. Eventually, she retreated to her mansion, sulking in silence. Some joked that she'd become a ghost, haunting the edges of the neighborhood but never daring to step forward again. For John, the experience was transformative. He'd gone from being a quiet, unassuming guy to a champion for justice. Along the way, he'd learned the value of standing up for what's right, even when it feels like the odds are stacked against you. More importantly, he'd shown his daughter the kind of man he was, someone who believed in fairness, integrity, and the power of community. And as for Crystal Lake, well, it was finally living up to its name, a place of peace, beauty, and harmony. All thanks to one man's refusal to let a bully win. Winning the election felt like a monumental victory, but John knew the real battle was just beginning. Karen might have lost her title as HOA president, but she wasn't about to go quietly into the night. If anything, her defeat only fueled her bitterness. She started showing up at every meeting, arms crossed and lips pursed, ready to pounce on any decision John made. Her presence loomed large, like a storm cloud threatening to rain on everyone's parade. At first, John tried to ignore her. He focused on implementing the changes he'd promised during his campaign, things like capping fines, rewriting outdated rules, and making the HOA more transparent. But Karen wasn't interested in progress. Every time John proposed a new policy, she interrupted with objections, nitpicking details, or accusing him of overstepping his authority. It was exhausting, but John refused to let her derail his plans. He reminded himself why he'd run for president in the first place: to make life better for everyone in Crystal Lake. Karen's tactics soon escalated beyond mere interruptions. She began filing grievances against John, claiming he was unfit for leadership. One week, she accused him of mismanaging funds. The next, she alleged that he was favoring certain homeowners over others. Each complaint was baseless, but it forced John to spend hours gathering evidence to prove otherwise. The whole situation felt like a game one where Karen kept moving the goalposts, hoping to trip him up. But here's the thing about games: sometimes your opponent ends up tripping themselves. That's exactly what happened when Karen decided to take her grievances public. She drafted a letter accusing John of corruption and sent it to every household in the neighborhood. At first glance, the letter seemed damning. It listed facts about supposed violations John had committed since taking office. But upon closer inspection, it became clear that Karen had exaggerated or outright fabricated most of her claims. For example, she accused John of spending HOA money on luxury items for his daughter's cabin. In reality, the expense report she referenced was for routine maintenance work done on common areas around the lake. Another claim stated that John had ignored noise complaints from multiple residents. When people checked the logs, they found only one complaint, and it turned out to be from Karen herself, who claimed the sound of birds chirping outside her window was disruptive. The backlash against Karen was swift and decisive. Neighbors started sharing screenshots of her letter online, pointing out its glaring inconsistencies. Someone even created a meme mocking her obsession with bird noises, which went viral within the community. For the first time, Karen's bullying tactics were exposed for what they truly were: desperate attempts to cling to power. Despite the ridicule, Karen didn't back down. Instead, she doubled down, filing yet another grievance, this time demanding an audit of the HOA's finances. On paper, it sounded reasonable. After all, audits were standard practice in many organizations. But John suspected this was just another ploy to waste his time and resources. Still, he agreed to the audit, confident that it would prove his innocence. When the results came back, they confirmed what John already knew: the HOA's finances were in perfect order. Not only that, but the audit also highlighted several instances where Karen had exploited her position as president to benefit herself. There were receipts for extravagant landscaping projects at her mansion, invoices for personal expenses disguised as community improvements, and records of excessive fines levied against neighbors who dared to question her authority. With the audit report in hand, John called an emergency meeting of the HOA board. He presented the findings to the members, along with copies of Karen's grievances and letters. The room was silent as everyone processed the information. Finally, one board member spoke up. "This is unacceptable," he said, shaking his head. "We can't allow someone to abuse their power like this." The rest of the board agreed. They voted unanimously to strip Karen of her membership privileges, effectively banning her from participating in future HOA activities. It was a bold move, but one that everyone supported. For years, Karen had operated above the rules, manipulating the system to suit her needs. Now she was finally being held accountable. Karen, predictably, was furious. She stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door behind her. Over the following weeks, she tried everything she could think of to regain control. She filed appeals, contacted lawyers, and even reached out to local news outlets in hopes of generating sympathy. But none of it worked. Without evidence to back up her claims, her efforts fell flat. Eventually, she stopped showing up altogether, retreating to her lakeside mansion like a wounded animal licking its wounds. Without Karen's constant interference, things at Crystal Lake began to improve rapidly. Meetings became less tense and more productive. Rules were rewritten to reflect the community's values rather than Karen's whims. Fines were capped at reasonable levels, and residents no longer lived in fear of being penalized for minor infractions. Most importantly, people started working together again. Neighbors who had once avoided each other now chatted over coffee, or helped each other with home repairs. The sense of camaraderie was palpable. John played a big role in fostering this newfound spirit of cooperation. He made it a point to attend community events, whether it was a summer barbecue or a holiday lights contest. He listened to feedback, adjusted policies when necessary, and always approached problems with a solution-oriented mindset. Under his leadership, the HOA transformed from a source of stress into a pillar of support and a true partner in maintaining the beauty and harmony of Crystal Lake. Of course, John didn't do it alone. The coalition that had helped him win the election remained active, volunteering their time and skills to tackle ongoing challenges. Margaret organized gardening workshops to teach neighbors how to care for their lawns without breaking the bank. Tom set up a website where residents could track upcoming projects and submit suggestions. Even Emily got involved, hosting movie nights at the cabin to bring people together. As the months passed, Crystal Lake began to feel like a different place entirely. Homes looked brighter, gardens flourished, and laughter echoed across the water. People smiled more, greeted each other warmly, and took pride in their community. It was as if a weight had been lifted, a dark cloud dispersed, revealing the sunshine underneath. Still, John couldn't help but wonder how long this peace would last. Could the neighborhood sustain this momentum, or would old habits creep back? And once the dust settled? To ensure lasting change, he introduced a series of safeguards. Monthly town halls gave residents a platform to voice concerns. A rotating committee system ensured no single person could dominate decision-making. And regular financial audits kept the HOA accountable to the people it served. By the end of his first term, John felt confident that Crystal Lake was on solid ground. The community had weathered a storm and come out stronger on the other side. More importantly, they'd learned valuable lessons about standing up for themselves and supporting one another. These weren't just policies or procedures. They were principles that would guide them for years to come. As for Karen, she remained a shadowy figure in the background, rarely seen outside her mansion. Some joked that she'd become part of the furniture, haunting the edges of the neighborhood, but never daring to step forward again. Others speculated that she might eventually sell her property and move away. Whatever the case, her influence was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of unity and purpose. Looking back, John realized how far they'd come. What started as a simple act of moving boxes into his daughter's cabin had spiraled into a fight for justice, a fight that ultimately brought the community closer together. He hadn't set out to be a hero, but in standing up to Karen, he'd inspired others to do the same. And that, more than anything, was something worth celebrating. Months had passed since John took over as HOA president, and Crystal Lake was barely recognizable. The neighborhood that once felt tense and divided now buzzed with energy and warmth. People weren't just coexisting anymore, they were thriving together. It was the kind of transformation John could only dream of when he first decided to run against Karen. But here it was, happening right before his eyes. One sunny Saturday afternoon, Emily threw her first big summer barbecue at the cabin. She'd invited friends, neighbors, and even some of the newer residents who had recently moved into the area. The backyard was alive with laughter, music, and the smell of grilled burgers wafting through the air. Kids ran around chasing each other, while adults lounged on picnic blankets or chatted near the lake. For the first time in years, Crystal Lake felt like a true community, a place where people genuinely cared about one another. John stood by the grill, flipping burgers and basking in the moment. He watched as Emily laughed with her friends, her face glowing with happiness. Nearby, Margaret sat under an umbrella, knitting a scarf while chatting with Tom, who was showing off photos of his newly renovated driveway. Even the quieter neighbors, the ones who used to keep to themselves, were mingling and smiling. It was hard to believe this was the same neighborhood that had been paralyzed by fear under Karen's rule. As the day went on, John couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. The journey hadn't been easy. There were moments when he doubted himself, when Karen's relentless attacks made him question whether it was all worth it. But looking around now, surrounded by happy faces and the hum of joyful conversation, he knew every struggle had been worth it. This wasn't just about winning an election or ousting a bully. It was about creating a space where everyone felt valued and respected. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, John gathered everyone for a toast. Holding up his glass, he smiled warmly at the crowd. "To Crystal Lake," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "This place is more than just houses and trees. It's home. And I'm proud to say we've built something special here. Something strong." The group erupted into cheers, clinking their glasses together. Someone shouted, "And to John," which earned another round of applause. John raised a hand to quiet them down, though his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. No, he said with a chuckle. "This isn't about me. It's about all of us. We did this together. Every single person here played a part in making this community what it is today." He paused, letting the words sink in. Then, with a playful grin, he added, "And let's not forget, we did it without any unnecessary fines, noise complaints, or pink petunia drama." A comment drew loud laughs, especially from Margaret, who nearly spilled her lemonade in amusement. After the toast, the night stretched on, filled with stories and shared memories. One neighbor recounted how she finally got approval to repaint her front door after years of being told it didn't match the HOA palette. Another joked about how his dog could now bark freely without earning him a fine. Each story highlighted the small but meaningful ways life had improved since Karen's reign ended. These weren't monumental changes, but they mattered deeply to the people living them. As the party wound down, John found himself sitting by the water's edge with Emily. They sipped hot cocoa and listened to the gentle lapping of waves against the shore. "I can't believe how different things are now," Emily said softly, wrapping her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It feels like magic." John chuckled. "Not magic," he corrected gently. "Just people deciding to stand up for themselves. That's all it takes. Sometimes one person saying enough is enough." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "Still, I'm proud of you, Dad. You didn't have to do any of this, but you did. And look what happened." John smiled, gazing out at the shimmering lake. "Yeah, well, I couldn't let someone ruin your cabin or this place for everyone else. Besides," he added with a wink, "someone had to teach Karen a lesson." They both laughed, the sound blending seamlessly with the peaceful night. For a while, neither of them spoke, content to simply sit and enjoy the moment. Eventually, Emily broke the silence. "Do you think she'll ever leave? Like, sell her house and move away?" John shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. Honestly, I don't care as long as she stays out of everyone's business. Let her live in her mansion if she wants. As long as she doesn't try to control us anymore, I'm fine with it." Emily tilted her head, studying him curiously. Do you think she regrets anything? Like, do you think she knows how much damage she caused? John thought about it for a moment. Honestly, probably not. Some people never admit they're wrong, no matter how obvious it is. But that's okay. At the end of the day, it's not about her, it's about us. About moving forward and building something better. Emily smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. You're pretty wise, you know that? John laughed softly,
ruffling her hair affectionately. Wise? Nah, just stubborn.
Once I set my mind to something, I don't give up easily. The rest of the night passed quietly, with most guests heading home as the stars began to twinkle overhead. By the time the last car pulled away, John felt a deep sense of satisfaction settle over him. He glanced back at the cabin, its windows glowing warmly in the darkness. It was exactly what he'd hoped for, a safe haven for his daughter, a gathering spot for friends and family, and a symbol of resilience. Over the following weeks, life at Crystal Lake continued to flourish. Neighbors organized regular events, from book clubs to kayaking trips. The HOA meetings, once dreaded, became opportunities for collaboration and creativity. People volunteered their time and skills to improve common areas, planting flower beds and painting fences. Even the local wildlife seemed happier, with ducks returning to the lake and birds chirping cheerfully in the mornings. Much to Karen's likely annoyance, Karen herself remained largely invisible, rarely venturing beyond her property line. When she did appear, it was usually to glare at passers-by or mutter under her breath. But her presence carried none of the weight it once did. Without her power to intimidate or manipulate, she was reduced to a mere shadow of her former self. Some joked that she'd become part of the scenery, like an old tree or a weathered dock post. Others speculated that she might eventually sell her mansion and disappear for good. Whatever the future held for her, one thing was certain: her days of ruling Crystal Lake were over. For John, the experience had been transformative. He'd gone from being an ordinary guy just trying to help his daughter to a leader who inspired change in his community. Along the way, he discovered strengths he didn't know he had: patience, determination, and the ability to unite people toward a common goal. More importantly, he'd shown Emily the kind of man he was, someone who believed in fairness, integrity, and standing up for what's right. As autumn rolled around again, painting the trees in vibrant shades of red and phosphorescent toward and gold, John reflected on the past year. Winning the HOA presidency hadn't been his original plan, but it had turned into one of the most rewarding experiences of his life. He'd made mistakes along the way, faced setbacks, and dealt with plenty of stress. But through it all, he'd stayed true to his values, and in doing so, he'd helped transform a neighborhood. One crisp morning, as he walked along the lakeshore with Emily, John stopped to admire the view. The water sparkled in the sunlight, reflecting the beauty of the world around it. You know, he said quietly, this place reminds me of why we fought so hard. It's peaceful. It's ours. Emily smiled, looping her arm through his. Yeah, it is, thanks to you. John shook his head, squeezing her hand. Thanks to all of us. And with that, they turned back toward the cabin, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Crystal Lake wasn't perfect. It never would be, but it was home. And for John, Emily, and everyone else who called it their own, that was more than enough.